across a number of allied health professions that sit within our department. I do a lot of work around placement and placement quality and expansion across all the professions. So it's great to see so many people with so many different backgrounds joining together today, and I hope we'll make some really useful progress across all the professions for practice-based learning.
Thanks, Jill. So Jill and I started this group up because we were having conversations about what we were doing across our respective universities, and we sort of said to us, we were sort of chatting and saying, well, there must be lots of other people that are obviously doing the same things as us, and can we get people together? Because we recognised that there wasn't really anywhere where everybody could just come together across the professions. There's individual things for all the individual professions, but there wasn't anything where we could really come together. So that's why we sort of went out to ask people actually if they thought this was a good idea. And then we were inundated on Twitter with lots of people saying, oh, wow, how fabulous, brilliant idea, etc., etc. And so that's how this has been born. So we then went out with a little survey where we asked people what they wanted and how they would like it to work. And the things that came up as really people wanted were initially leadership was top, hence the topic for today, followed by research, followed by simulation, and then followed by clinical. So that's what we were going to do, and people wanted it during the day, and they also wanted it for an hour and a half. So we've responded to the feedback, and hence this is how it's all come together today. So we've got a fantastic programme of people around the topic of leadership and leadership placements. So we've got, you can see on the screen there, we've got Tamsin Baird, who's very kindly come from the CSP to talk about the 4 pillars of practice. Debs Wilson, Clinical Education Improvement Fellow, is talking about leadership and the evidence. She's done lots of work around that. David Marsden, Practice Learning Lead from HEE, is going to talk about HEE perspective and his personal experience of doing leadership placements. We're very lucky that we have Chris Gibson, who is a DRAD student. He's going to talk about his experience of a leadership placement. Myself and Jill are going to give our top tips from a HEI perspective, and then there'll be time at the end for question, answers and discussion. I've also got 3 students in the room as well with me, who 2 OT students and 1 apprentice physio who were on leadership placements with me. The OT students started last week, and the apprentice and an MSc OT student who started this week together, which is very exciting, doing an interprofessional placement. They're also in the room, so they may be able to give their perspectives of how it feels for them at the very beginning of their placements as well, which will be great. So I'd like to hand over to Tamsin, if that's okay. So Jill, do you want to stop sharing? And Tamsin is going to talk to us about the 4 pillars of practice.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. So I'll just bring my slides up. Hopefully that's worked. Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Tamsin Baird, and I am a professional advisor at the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy, and I work within the workforce and education team. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Helen and Jill for inviting me to come along today to speak to you about a topic that I'm really passionate about: providing quality practice-based learning, creating learning opportunities, and developing our future AHP workforce. Now, I'm going to start by providing an overview of the 4 pillars of practice. So these are clinical, education, leadership, and research, and all of which are really applicable to the AHP workforce. Now, these pillars are becoming more common language, having been introduced to us through the Advanced Practice Agenda in England and through various different career frameworks in Wales and Scotland. And more recently, AHP professional bodies have been integrating these 4 pillars within their work. And at the CSP, for example, these pillars will be forming the basis for a robust career framework across all levels of practice. And we know that this is similar across different AHPs. Now, the driver for this 4 pillars approach is to ensure a flexible and sustainable workforce, and one that can meet the current and future population needs. So we're now going to go through these different pillars one by one. Now, first up, clinical pillar, and this is often the easiest for us all to associate with, and it describes the knowledge, the skills and the behaviours that are needed to provide high quality healthcare that's safe, effective and person-centred. And on the flip side, we've got the research pillar, which is often the most misunderstood. Now, this might be down to it sounding complicated or difficult, so keeping it simple, this pillar involves using evidence to inform our practice. Now, this can include lots of different aspects, such as formal research or the writing of journal articles, but it also involves audits, being involved in service improvements and applying guidelines into practice. Because, you know, how can we know if our interventions are effective if we don't measure outcomes? And how will our practice evolve if we don't test change? And how can we request investment in services if we don't measure their impact? Okay, next up, we've got the education pillar. Now, you might automatically think about formal teaching here, but this pillar also includes educating and empowering others, facilitating student learning, engaging in in-service trainings, supporting colleagues and actively learning from clinical supervision, amongst lots and lots of other examples. Now, learning can be achieved in many different ways. So some examples may be formal or planned, such as courses or journal clubs, and others might be more informal and opportunistic, such as supporting a colleague in their reasoning or in their intervention application, for example. But all of these are of equal importance, and with quality, reflective practice, they all massively contribute to the education pillar. Okay, finally, we've got the leadership pillar and the focus of today's webinar. So leadership is an essential skill to the delivery of high quality services. However, when we think of leadership, we often focus on those who may be in clinical lead or management positions, and not so much about students or those in their early careers. And this mindset needs to change, because leadership is a skill and not a role, and as such, it can and must happen at every level. And we should absolutely recognise our leadership roles in delivering care and empowering and influencing others. And it's important that AHP roles contain an element of all 4 pillars. And why is it important? Well, because we need a strong and diverse workforce to champion what we do. We need a workforce with the ability to influence, to lead and work with others, to demonstrate quality and evidence-based practice, to be actively involved in educating and empowering others, and to be providing patient-centred and safe care. So let's think about why leadership placements are important to different groups, with students first. Okay, so students are our future workforce. Once they graduate, they're going to be working in an increasingly complex healthcare system. And now, providing opportunity for students with exposure to leadership settings will enable them to be inspired for their career, to see the breadth of the AHP workforce across different settings, and to better understand the ability to influence systems and design services that best meet population need. Now, I've got a quote on the screen in front of you here that's from one of the students who was on a leadership placement with us at the CSP that I just love. So, clinical placements may develop students into physiotherapists, but leadership placements can develop them into better ones. Okay, so next up, why do leadership placements matter to AHPs? Well, people need AHPs now more than ever. Populations are living longer, often with multiple health needs, and there's a demand for a growing healthcare workforce. And because of this, we must develop and grow the AHP workforce accordingly, so everyone can reach their full potential. Now, leadership placements help showcase the depth and breadth of the workforce and develop these skills at a pre-reg level. Now, we get that leadership placements are pretty new to many people. And a lot of people who are perhaps on this webinar today, when they were training, if they went through a healthcare course, they probably didn't do a leadership placement. But I'd encourage people that rather than looking backwards to the settings in which placements have traditionally been, we've got a real opportunity to look forwards and plan to develop the skills that are now needed to thrive in modern healthcare systems. Why do leadership placements matter to placement providers? So these are the organisations where students go to on placement. Now, organisations need an AHP workforce with leadership skills, people who can influence, empower and negotiate, with leaders to drive forward their services, think creatively and provide solutions. And for those of you who maybe are from a placement organisation, this also opens up placements across a bigger team, so you're not relying on the same educators each time. I'd also encourage you to think about what a leadership placement could offer you, okay? Now, from my experience, with the placements that we have hosted at the CSP and the ones we're planning on hosting going forwards, you learn so much from their vision, from the students' energy and the fresh ideas as they input into your work. Okay, next up, and you know, of utmost importance, is the impact that leadership placements can have on individuals, communities and populations. A lot of the drivers that made us go into our profession in the first place. So whether that be a better understanding of a population health approach, experience in designing services to best meet patient needs, addressing health inequalities, showcasing and shaping a profession, or developing resources. These all matter to be able to provide better patient-centred care to the individuals, the communities, and the populations that we serve. And, you know, these skills absolutely transfer through into a clinical setting. So enough about the why. Let's think a little bit about the how. Now, at the CSP, we have developed a common placement assessment form, and this is one standard way of assessing students out on placement that can be used for all universities and across all practice settings. Now, it was key in the development of the Common Placement Assessment Form, or CPAF, that this form needed to be applicable in non-patient facing settings. And for a few reasons: to open up these learning opportunities that our future workforce needs, but also to showcase that this is a placement. So students had some conceptions of what is a placement, and if the learning objectives could not be met on a leadership placement, then it made people feel that that was less than. So the CPAF seeks to address this by all the learning outcomes being applicable in leadership settings. I'd encourage you to have a little look. So we've got a link on the screen there in front of you, where members and non-members alike from the CSP can go and have a look at the form and have a look at the resources that go with it that help to explain the different learning outcomes and what they might mean in different settings. Other hows that we've got a link there to some innovative placement videos, of which one of them is about a fantastic leadership placement between HEE and a Brighton University student, and talks through the process from the student, the placement provider and the university organisation. We've also got a series of case studies where people have submitted their innovative placements. That's called placement profiles. Again, if you follow the link through there, you'll be able to get some inspiration and to be able to see some different examples of where people have adopted their leadership placements, and they've given us some top tips for others as well who are thinking of doing the same. Okay, so the other how is what I would like you all to consider throughout this webinar. So over to you. How could you create leadership placement opportunities that work in your setting and within your team to help to unlock some learning experiences that would also develop these much needed future skills of the AHP workforce. Okay, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you so much, Tamsin. That's really sort of set the scene for us for leadership and these different aspects of those four pillars of practice. So I'd like to hand over now to Debbie Wilson, who is a Clinical Education Improvement Fellow, and she's going to talk to us about the evidence so far. So over to you, Debbie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen and Jill, and this is just so exciting that we've got this community together. Thank you everyone for coming today. It's brilliant. I've been very fortunate this year as an Education Improvement Fellow to actually explore this space for the last 10-11 months, and so today I'm just going to hopefully give you a bit of a flavour of where the research sort of started. This is very new, and what Tamsin's just been saying really resonates with me, and I'm sure as the conversations go along in the community that this will be really relevant to everybody. So can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. Thank you. So I just want to just set the scene, say I'm not going to talk about management today. Obviously, leadership and management are very much closely related, but very much separate entities. And I think this is where I start my presentation today, is to talk to you about, I dare you. And I dare you to define leadership, because one of the things that's going to come up with this concept, and probably in your head at the moment, and with a lot of students, is what is leadership? And although this is a very separate presentation to talk about labelling leadership, it's going to come up within the research today. Because if we're going to call a placement something new, something innovative, and something that perhaps is a little scary and not simple, it will come with those questions and unfamiliarities. So we need to think about the fact that, you know, part of what we're doing today and part of what the work that we're all trying to do is of a common purpose, shared purpose, but it's not going to be simple because it does mean cultural change. So in my mind, leadership is a craft of behaviours which is underpinned by values. And I didn't just get leadership through a course, but I was made aware of them through both those informal experiences, those practice-based experiences I've had as a clinician, and also the formal learning experiences. And again, I come from the generation where that wasn't introduced to me as a topic as a student, but I think it's something that we really do need to have a conversation about. So just to start with the first bit of research, if we look at shared leadership, we know that if we allow people to come into a leadership space, it creates personal empowerment, positive group behaviour, and better organisational performance. So there is a really strong reason why we need to do this today. We need to look at the research and we need to say, okay, we've got stuff there. What can we do with it? Can we have the next slide, please? So I'm going to bring this to you because this is really the crux, 3 words that really define it for me. So it's really important at the bottom. We've got the being, the person, the human, the health professional who is coming out to develop themselves as a professional. So the journey you are on is unique and different, and we all come with our own skill sets. And then at the top, we've got the leadership language, we've got the theory, we've got all this interesting information that needs to be there, this knowledge of what leadership is. And then in the middle, we've got the practice, we've got the doing. Okay, and so it's really important that we join and we align these 3 things. And this is what the research is saying to us, is that we do need some basis of teaching and theory, but we need to develop that person to understand themselves as a leader. And by doing the practice, we actually get a much better experience and we get much better results. And that's really important that the research is saying that. And so what we're doing by creating leadership placements is really relevant. It's saying what happens if we put people into this doing space. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's out there? So this is really relevant. There is a lot of information out there. If you want to just Google leadership, the definitions are complicated. There's loads of information. People have researched leadership till they're blue in the face, but that doesn't help us. What we need to think about is the fact that the evidence is point of reason to do this. There's a why, there is a why, and that's great. And Tamsin's really set that out. And actually the 4 pillars are in there because there is evidence to say we've got some guidance, we've got some curricular framework, we've got lots of leadership experience, we've got programs you can go on to get the theory, we've got evidence that in healthcare we need good development of these behaviours. So there's plenty of information to go on. However, not as much published. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So the starting point for me to look at this as a research project this year was the fact that there was some paucity. This is new, this is innovative, so we need to think about the implementation and what was going on. And critically, there was not a lot of research around benchmarking. So what have we got for clarity? Are we all on board? Who's driving this? What's driving this? Is there evidence for all 14 HPs going out into the leadership space? And so that was really important part of thinking about there's a paucity in evidence around benchmarking. There's also, and there's always paucity in qualitative data. And with anything new, this is a really exciting time to sort of gather that evidence and start looking at what we can do with the activity that's taking place. Before we can do really robust research studies, we've got to gather what's going on. And so for me, there were questions around the risk attitudes. Who's driving this and why are we driving this and what's underpinning it? What happens when we bring people into different learning environments? What's the unwanted variation? Where's the resistance, the challenge, the barriers to this innovation and moving forward? What can we capture? We've also got a lack of evidence around the student life course, so the journey of a student becoming a registrant. And that's really important for us to think about. We're asking lots of really important questions about preceptorship space, about early careers, and how are we creating our professionals to get them to the point where we're coming into fit for practice, registrant space. You know, a lot of these questions haven't been asked or fully mapped correctly. So what happens if we start introducing leadership in when perhaps it hasn't been at the front of people's minds before? This is going to be giving us some really interesting evidence about that student life course and that journey process. As Helen mentioned before, and as we know, there hasn't been a good evidence around learning systems. We haven't had a really good connectivity, and I think COVID has brought us a really good opportunity to come together in spaces like this so we can support each other in this continuous learning process and share some of this early knowledge as quickly as we can to start generating more action for change. And like I say, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of published evidence to go on here. So I can't share with you loads of really good evidence-based studies because it's just new. So this is the discovery space that we're in today and where my project's been driven from. Next slide, please. So sorry about the busy slide, but my project, the Pebble project, and many of you on the call might have been involved in this, and thank you so much. Those of you who have been involved in the project capture will be on the receiving end of some of the reporting and some of the other data that's coming out shortly. So we're coming towards the end of the project capture. So thank you to those that have been there. It's been about collecting and theming the common behaviours, actions and attitudes towards planning, delivering and experiencing leadership focused placements, trying to map what was really happening in that moment in time when we started to just look at what was going on and collating evidence for the reciprocal benefits of these innovative placement cultures through a systems convening discovery piece. In a nutshell, I talked to a lot of people and we gathered an awful lot of iterative information. So we just said, what's going on? And we caught this in an appreciative inquiry approach. And by collecting that tacit knowledge, we're able to map that lived experience, look at activity variation and create a map of where the opinions, the problems, the placements are lying, and really think about the questions around the readiness for these types of placements and perhaps where were the challenges and barriers and what we could do about it. It's a multi-stage approach to the research project that I've run, and this has been about collecting regional conversation. We then went to national stakeholder conversation, and we've also been looking at some workshop conversations where we talk with pre-registrants about their opinions. And we've used Dan Schroeder's consolidated implementation framework to map the intervention characteristics. So we're hopefully going to be able to demonstrate these positive outcomes that we're all talking about, reduce some of the uncertainty and some of the unwanted variation that has come out the project space, and develop this positive learning system. So for your information, things that are coming out, this outputs of the project are a logic model of why we're doing it, a simple rules for practice, an evaluation tool that you can all use, a self-evaluation tool, and an implementation framework about how we evidence, how we call to action to make sure we bring this need for change across the 14 professions. Next slide, please. Okay, very quickly, but a really important capture of the moment where we looked at and we said, who's doing this placement? Who's out there? We had a huge number of the larger professions. So here we've got a huge number of physio students who were experienced in the leadership placements. And then it goes down a little bit. So it goes to OTs, and then we get smaller, middle-sized professions. And then with the smaller and vitals, we were getting very little capture of students being offered these types of placement experiences. If you go to the next slide, please. Oh, back one, please. Thank you. And also, who was delivering? So who was coordinating and educating in this space? So which leaders were out there offering? And again, we had a majority of physio, heavy dominant with physio, then OT, lots of dietitians involved in this work. And then again, middle-sized professions were offering lots of placements also. So it really depended on where people were within role. And then again, you go down to the smaller and vital professions where there was less representation from a leadership and educator space. Thank you. Next slide, please. So what now, what have I learned? Well, what matters about the fact that we've captured this discovery work? So there's some really important information about the discovery of context. So we now know a little bit about the models, about where these placements are taking place. They're not just in pure leadership environments. There are some blended approaches, some hybrid approaches, some really important learning lessons around leadership placements taking place across and through the pillars. So leadership within research, leadership within education. And this is really important that we capture the fact that there's some broad context to the types of models of placement. We've also got some gaps within the evidence of what was going on. We now have some evidence to say, actually, these are the things that are going on, and they'll be shared within the wider report. We understand the drivers. There were some very key drivers around demand, very key drivers around capacity during COVID, and then also this really important space, again, that Tamsin already talked about, which is development of AHP leadership skills. And that's really important for thinking about our workforce plan. We also have some really interesting information and evidence coming out around the complexity of these placements. The mindset of leaders as learners and learners as leaders has been really interesting. So there's great capture around that. And it also demonstrates around the complexity, the specificity about what we need to make sure these placements work. This is things such as labelling leadership correctly, so labelling management and leadership separately, which I alluded to before, about learner readiness. And for me, there's something really important about the social model of change within this that we need to explore further, and differentiation of learning. So a lot of polarity for me came out initially with people saying you can only offer leadership to someone who's about to graduate, or you can't introduce a first year to this concept. There was a lot of myth busting for me about collecting these opinions and paradigms and thinking about why do we have these paradigms and what is involved within the complexity of understanding about what people do have capacity to do within their pre-registrant space. We now have some information about the capabilities, the individual and the collective capabilities that have been alluded to by Tamsin also. So the evidence is there about actually, we can see these are really game-changing experiences for students who get to go through it. So there's this competitive advantage that organisations that offer actually see benefits. There's a reduction in hierarchy. There's a visibility of students. There's some really exciting work that I know a lot of you are doing about, getting business cases written and change process and service improvement. Fantastic work, and students are really experiencing this change process individually and gaining capabilities and competencies that are fully transferable across their professional development space. Really important evidence that's coming out about that. From an impact perspective, you know, what do we need to do next? I think it's really important that we've got different stages of change going on within the different professions. That's very much come through with the evidence of who's doing what. And also some really important information about how do we spread this? What do we do with the talent that we're creating? What do we do with this fantastic journey for our pre-registrants through to the early space of being about 5 and beyond? And within the logic and benchmarking side of this, we absolutely need to evaluate and measure. And this robust measurement that's need to come through with the next sort of research space is going to be around the implementation of curricular change, really understanding getting the theory to practice sorted, and also getting some long-term monitoring about what happens when we really create this change agency within our pre-registrants. So for me, there's some challenges around the variations that have come out of the study, things that I wasn't expecting about uptake, resistance, outcomes, and I do have, you know, information that's come through the study about how we could perhaps fix and change some of the conversation to make sure we impact the people we serve, i.e. in our registrants moving through into the workforce. And so there's a little call to action really about the fact that we are learning, it is new. We do have some failure anecdotes that came through the research. So there are some examples of when it didn't quite work and we can learn from them. But we also have some real brilliant lessons of talent management, what we can do when we offer project management space, what happens when we run workshops for students and masterclasses to allow people to come into this space and understand it better. Next slide, please. So there are commonalities across the 4 pillars. There's a real capture of this radical moment of what happens when we really create some fantastic innovative placement options, but also we need to be accountable of really talking about our actions so that we can think about the drivers for change, being positive about our developing workforce. We do have shared purpose about placement expansion here, but very much something around the quality and sustainability of these types of placements. We got some capture where there was very early leadership placement offer going on, and then it trailed off into people not wanting to take the placements up because there was some fear and misinterpretation and lack of involvement in organising and planning for these placements. And that's really learned from. So when we're fueling these types of placements, we need this steady flame of innovation so we can think about the pace and spread and make sure we don't leave people behind. That's really important. We need roles to support it. So co-production's a really key thing that's come out of this research space. Students being involved in placement development, really working across the system to develop these placements. Anywhere you can host a student. Let's get rid of that myth. Let's think about how we do it and plan well. If we develop learner independence on these types of placements, then we just need to think about our flexibility within the learner support, and that's really important, particularly if they're going into the virtual space. So we just need to think about modifying what we're giving from our educator training to make sure our educators have got the skills and tools to make sure we're working supportively for students. And we do need to bridge this leadership gap, so we need to bring our learners to a space where they understand it's part of the process, that we embed this into the language of the curriculum, and that we can allow people to take those next steps on their journey so they can come into the placement space ready to move into the next stage of their leadership development. And there are some simple rules we can follow. Let me just next slide, please. So what is possible? Well, everyone can lead, and the evidence that's come out of this is I've got first years that were being brought into leadership space who are thriving. So let's just get rid of that myth. This is not about you can only offer it for one type of student. This should be for everybody. It's a pillar of practice. It should be available to all. Everyone can lead. We just need to label it, and we need to use a developmental approach to make sure we understand where the learner is at with their learning needs to move to the next stage. If we reduce what is possible, sorry about the dog, always typical when you're doing a presentation. If you think about what is possible is we can reduce uncertainty, and these sorts of events are really key for this. We can reduce hierarchy, we can reduce the worries around these types of placement. We need to communicate better, and to do that, this co-production is really key. Let's really integrate peer learning across the system as well as peer learning in the student space. That's been really important about reducing worries that peer-to-peer learning works. 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1 and beyond has actually been really, really useful for this particular type of placement experience. And also what is possible, and Tamsin talked about it, is aligning learning outcomes. There's absolutely no reason we can't do this. So this has been demonstrated through the research project space this year. As long as we listen, we adapt, we reflect, and we coach in this space, that we really don't try and over-own it, that we actually coach through this space, we can really help the students move forward. Next slide, please. So what's next? It's just that we're in a cultural shift. Change takes place over time, but we do need to commit to this. For learning from the project for me has been about, we've got to reduce some unwanted variation. We've really got to think about some of our hidden bias. We do have some examples of placements that were very much organised around choosing students, perhaps for reasons that we need to just explore a bit further. We need a conversation around that. And there is some advice coming through from the project space around it. So we need to address our inclusivity if we want a really good diverse workforce. We need to think about continuous learning, and here's my plug, because in the next month we'll be launching in Health Education England the Helen space, which is the Early Leadership AHP network. This will be on the Learning Hub, and it'll be on the Community Futures platform, on the NHS Futures platform. And this is a space to talk and share resources and bring to a national repository the knowledge we've gained, and let's keep moving forward in supporting each other in making these placements work. We do need to accept there's some politics and some bureaucracy and some challenges still within some of our professional bodies, within some of our professional spaces, but we're not going to accept resistance. We just need to progress together. We need to support each other to progress these placements forward. This is about our people, our workforce and our future. And that starts from the moment people arrive on their healthcare courses. We need to carefully invest in those behaviours to impact our workforce positively moving forward. Next slide, please. So I just want to say thank you for listening to the research from a curiosity point of view. We do have some evidence now. I'd be delighted to continue the conversation. And again, thank you to all the participants in the study.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Debs. That was a really inspiring talk, and it's just absolutely brilliant, your project and what you've done, and getting that evidence for us that we know is there, but actually now what you've done is give us that evidence behind it. So that's absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce David Marsden now, our next speaker. David is the Practice Learning Lead for Health Education England, and he's going to talk to us from a Health Education England point of view, and also his own point of view around his experience of having students on leadership placements. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Helen. Can you see the slide okay? Just to check.
We can, yeah.
Great, thank
thanks.
you. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be here to talk about this again. As others have said, I'm passionate about this area, and that's why I'm doing this job. I've been an educator since I was a Band 5, indirectly, not supervising students, and as a support worker, really. So I've always valued being involved in this space. I lead the National Pre-Registration HEE Student Practice-Based Learning Programme, which is the longest title in the world. Leadership placements are one strand of that in terms of a project. And we produced a quick guide around leadership placements, which I'll speak about later. So first of all, the first thing I want to say, if I can move the slides on, so Tamsin did a great job of giving an excellent background of the 4 pillars of practice. First thing I want to say is that COVID was excellent in accelerating innovation around diverse types of placements. And what I don't want people to think, the public included, is that leadership placements were as a result of trying to catch up with placement capacity. Leadership placements, in my opinion, should have been part of the piece all the way along in terms of the 4 pillars of practice, and they're firmly part of the future in terms of making sure we've got 21st century practitioners to provide excellent care that we need in the complex future systems that we'll have. So that's the first thing I wanted to say to contextualize everything we're doing. In Health Education England, I worked in the North Eastern Yorkshire region until last summer, and we opened up for the first time Health Education England as a learning environment. So we had to put a proposal together and engage leaders and the kind of business case, I suppose, which was really welcomed. So we had, I think over a year in the region, we had about 12 students with us, physiotherapy and occupational therapy, even though and people have heard me say this before, I was begging for other AHPs as well, because we wanted to demonstrate that all AHPs could do this in this space. So one of the things we quickly did is commission a piece of work in partnership with the North Cumbria AHP faculty to evaluate the leadership placements. So what I'm showing you now, I'm not going to go into detail about the work, but what I'm showing you now is the part of the outcome of that work. So the outcome looked very similar to Deborah's work in some elements, looked at some of the enablers and challenges. But what I just wanted to present was what they thought was a good model in terms of principles to stick to in terms of leadership placements. And you'll see some of this reflected in what I'm going to apply in terms of my supervisory role in Health Education England in future slides. First one was an authentic project. Everyone agreed that the students been engaged in something that was worth doing and was going to be used and utilised, was really valuable and increased the motivation of the placements. Comprehensive preparation. There was hints that it requires a little bit more preparation than clinical placements, partly because when it's a clinical placement, you kind of know what's going to happen broadly, but leadership placements are new and diverse and require a little bit more, reflecting back to students about kind of what it might look like, so they're prepared. Another concept was multiple students, peer supervision. There's lots of advantages in having students paired up or more than pairs. So, for example, we in Health Education England, we have learning sets and group coaching sessions, things like that, where students support each other. Team involvement, making sure the learning environment is across the whole team. We know that. We've wanted to do that for years to make sure everyone is utilised, not just the supervisor. Accessible and flexible support. There's a recognition that because you're not face-to-face necessarily and around a team of people all of the time, that you don't necessarily have that access. So it's important that you've got access at the end of a phone or email to do quick resolving challenges. Clear curriculum links. This has been mentioned also in the first two presentations about the links to curricula to make sure leadership is embedded and reflects backwards and forwards. Inbuilt evaluation, making sure evaluation, that's good practice anyway. Yes, we've got NETs and we've got PAR in the North Eastern Yorkshire, for example, but evaluating the placement, asking students what worked well, what didn't, so we can continually improve. So that's what came out of that piece of work. So that, just to let you know, that was a series of interviews and focus groups based on practice-based learning leadership, students and their supervisors. And if anybody wants more information, I'm happy to put them in touch with the authors, which are listed at the bottom. So in terms of Health Education England, I'm currently in the national team and I have 2 students with me now. I nearly always have students with me. And again, Beverly Harden in the national team opened up the national team as a learning environment as well. But what I wanted to do to build in some consistency, which Deborah referred to, and reduce the variation, is start to build a little model for us in Health Education England and continually improve the model based on feedback and learning. So this has been this is the latest iteration. We've continually worked on it. It's not very restrictive for supervisors in Health Education England, but it's got some key pillars based on the learning. So first of all, we send out a learning pack which introduces people visually to who they're going to be working with, the key policy documents, and all the things you'd expect in a local induction, including reading material. And that seems to have been evaluated quite well so far. The key challenge around that is keeping it up to date and having somebody to do it in terms of sustainability, because things change all the time. An induction with the educator, that's an obvious one, but we put it in to make sure we always plan that in the student start. We always use a coaching approach. So the two ways we do that are, one, in supervision sessions, so in the one-to-ones we have each week. So if I'm asked a question about how to do something, my question back will clearly be, how do you think you can do it? Or a similar sophisticated coaching question. I'm experienced in coaching, and I'm also doing a level 7 diploma in coaching at the moment, but you know, there's easy ways to apply coaching without being experienced or qualified. So we also have an introduction to coaching session. We've got some videos that people can watch just so they get the principles of it. But the reason for the coaching approach is to enable not to lead, not to lead by the hand, basically, so we get more independent practitioners in the future. And although students find it difficult sometimes, all of them, I can't think of one who's not said it, it's a positive approach at the end of it. Again, at the top, we've got the one educator, multiple students, preferably different professions, because we want to build diversity into the placements. It seems to work quite well when we get students from different universities and different professions working together, the diversity of thought. So the leadership and project theory, all our students, so one thing I should say about the length, I should put this in the model really, is that we offer any length of placement in any model. So if somebody wants 2-day placement, I will make sure I meet their needs within that time. If they want a 10-week placement, I'll make sure I expand to fit and give challenge around the learning outcomes. So the Edward Jenner Leadership Programme, if students are on a placement for 4 weeks or more, we'll ask them to start completing the Edward Jenner Leadership Programme to give them some formal experience as well. Secondly, a project management session, so they understand the project, because we give them a real world project, and it really helps if they understand the basic principles in terms of starting at the end and working backwards. Stakeholder mapping, project plan, Gantt chart, etc., all the basics. We introduce a leadership framework, and what we do with the leadership framework is use that as a kind of SWOT analysis, or well, the strengths and weaknesses bit of the SWOT analysis really, to find out what they're strong in, because obviously students don't always come straight out of school and everybody's got life experience. So often people have got real strengths. So I'll help and try to, as well as supporting them to achieve the learning outcomes, is to focus on their needs in terms of developing leadership competencies. And yeah, the experiential bit is a real world project design. So the type of things, just so you know, that we've done is, well, I'll tell you what the current students are doing. We have Anna and Emma, and Anna is doing a national guide for role emerging placements, and Emma is doing a national guide for simulated placements. So that will complete our suite of guides around innovative placement models and the 4 pillars, because we've already done research, education, and leadership. And also wrapping around this really is shadowing at relevant HEE meetings. And I'll always ask the students to reflect after, to ask about my behaviour as a leader. What do you think I was trying to do in that meeting? Feedback. What do you think the meeting was about? Was it effective? That type of reflection, which helps along the way. So that model is in the national AHP leadership guide that we've got on the website, which the link is at the end too. So my personal reflections. Awareness of what the placements are. This has been touched by Deborah. Not many people are aware, so you get students saying they don't want to do leadership placements because they don't really understand and they think they're missing out. What some students have said to me, and I repeat now, is that the skills you learn on a clinical placement, some of the skills you might never use again, but on a leadership placement, you will use all of the skills in every single workplace you ever go into from now on. The other thing is students who want to develop leadership capabilities versus students who don't know they want to. So this is the situation about who do we choose, who does it, the equity. At the moment, it's been very much students who've volunteered or students who've not had placements during the absolute peak of the pandemic. And Some universities have done like a competition to say, you know, an expression of interest if there's only 2 places, for example. But what I've noticed is that some students want to develop as leaders, so are really motivated to do the placement. Some students aren't motivated, come on to placement, but then they realise and become inspired. So with that, it's very difficult to choose the people who are interested or motivated to engage in leadership, because they may not know until they do the placement. So that's a bit of a chicken and egg issue I'll leave you with. The power of coaching, there's a bit typo there. Power of coaching, if done well, I would say coaching is the way forward always, and we're doing a project on implementing coaching in practice-based learning. But it has to be done well, and it has to be consistent, and everybody needs to be signed up to it for it to work well. Treating students as equals, we know that this doesn't always happen, but I try very much to treat students as an employee, as part of the team. The only difference being is they've got a safety net because they're learning, and I'm not going to hold them to account in terms of performance management, but I will treat them as an equal until they ask for support and step out of that space. We've got evidence for that from the crowdsourcing event we did last year, the piece of work. Students identified that some of the language that was used, some of the cultural issues about supervisors not treating them as equals and not treating them as people and not respecting. So that's really important to us. Recognising the isolation of remote working, all the placements with me have been remote so far, and it always surprises me how difficult it is for some students to sit in front of a desk all day on their own in a room. I find it really easy. Some people don't, and I think it's a case of asking and making sure that everybody's okay in the well-being of students. Return on investment, finally. I guesstimate, and this isn't why we do it, apart from the professional development I get from and the enjoyment I get from supervising students, I guesstimated that Health Education England gets 5 times the investment back. So if I invest an hour, I think we get 5 hours back from students in terms of productivity, which is absolutely not the reason we're doing it, but students want that, and they want to be able to put things on the CV, like the production of a guide, etc. So I think it's a really good win-win situation. So finally, just to point you to some HEE resources, the Guide to Practice-Based Learning, which I've referenced, can be found on that link. We've got networks for each of the innovative placement types on MS Teams, including leadership, which people can access, put resources and have conversations. And we've got the Learning Hub, which is a repository for best practice. And I encourage everybody to put their resources on there if we can get everything in one place, even if they're somewhere else. So I've had a conversation with CSP, Tamsin will know this before, about it'd be good once things are on the CSP website to get them on the Learning Hub as well, because everything then is in one place and refers to that. And finally, just so you know the people involved, and also the email, the generic email you can contact on me if you've got any questions, and that's the website link there with all the resources for practice-based learning. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, David. There was some really excellent tips there for everybody in terms of how to run leadership placement, I think, and your thoughts from an HEE point of view. Absolutely fabulous, thank you. And these thoughts lead us in nicely to a student point of view. So we have Chris Gibson here, who has kindly agreed to share his experience of a leadership placement, and that was with HEE. So Chris, if you'd like to introduce yourself, over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm just going to, there we go, hopefully you can see that. Yep, we okay? Is that visible?
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so my name is Chris Gibson. I've lost the ability to see myself, so it's going to be a bit discombobulated. I'm a second year diagnostic radiography student. I'm based down in Kent. I'm at Canterbury Christ Church. And because I'm student forum chair for the SOR, Jill Harrison contacted me because she was arranging some leadership placements and asked if I'd like to be part of it, and I jumped at the chance, and I ended up with a 2-week placement. As David said, these are remote, so I was one of the students sitting at my desk for 2 weeks with HEE North Eastern Yorkshire. And our project was to set up a student council. So I worked on it for a week on my own, and then Shaheen and Hazema came on board, and they worked on it for a week and 2 weeks respectively. So we had an overlap of the 3 of us working on this project together for the North East and Yorkshire region. We were given a brief, same as what David was saying in the previous section. So we were asked to create something, and from that brief we took out this idea that there would be student voice and leadership, and it was kind of ironic that we were really focused on the leadership aspect of being on a leadership placement ourselves, as well as inclusion, and then created a cycle so there would be development and retention of students within it. So what I'm going to do is just quickly talk about the project, and then at the end I'll talk about kind of what I learned from being on this, and then if anyone's got any questions afterwards, please feel free to stick them in the chat. I think there is a Q&A section, but I'll try and answer ones as they come up. So I did a little bit of reading, a little bit of kind of research around it, and the idea that fostering a sense of belonging kind of improves retention, reduces attrition, but also fosters those relationships, and Shori's idea that coaching to improve not only academic potential but also your emotional and psychological well-being, that was really key to the thinking behind what we went on to develop. So we wanted parity among the NMA HPs, so the graphic, not a logo, I kept getting told it's not a logo, it's a graphic of all the AHPs, they're all equal. And I sit on a couple of different councils where it's done based on the population. So, you know, there's more nursing students, so there's more nursing students on the council. And I wanted to kind of get away from that, because what we really want is everyone to feel that they can talk and have equal weighting to each other, regardless of their profession and their training. We really focused on coaching and coming up with coaching models that could be used. And what we really were massively into was this idea that students would be part of HE projects. There was a call for student voice, and as a former teacher, I think student voice sometimes can actually be quite negative. It can be something where people just bring lots of complaints and lots of issues, and there isn't anything proactive. So we looked at student voice, but actually what we wanted was to get students involved in projects so that they were being not just reactive, but actually proactive in, okay, so how can we help improve this? What can I do? How can I step up to the plate? And that kind of leadership development was really what we wanted. And then this idea that, you know, because we were having parity, we'd have limited places to create some kind of buzz, make it a bit more exclusive, so people were applying towards it. Which meant that we came up with a recruitment criteria based on experience of what we've had being in forums and stuff. A lot of time you get people that apply to these things because they want something on their CV, and that's absolutely fine. But if you're working on a project, a bit like Dave was saying, you know, broadening it so you get the right people, but also how do you make sure those people are keen to actually do the work and be involved. So we spent a lot of time looking at recruitment criteria and talking to people who'd set up councils and stuff. And one thing that came out that we were really keen on is this idea of a reflective journal, because when you're applying for roles at the end of our degrees, we want to be able to demonstrate what we've been doing, not just academically, not just clinically, but what have we been doing to make ourselves the right person for this role, and also to get ourselves ready for that cycle of HCP registration and stuff like that. So this reflective journal went down really well. And I think if people kind of have half a mind, even keeping a folder on their computer of stuff they've attended and things that they've done, so that they've got some evidence there for writing CVs or writing cover letters or in their job interviews. We also thought it'd be quite nice to take some of these reflections and publish them, because there are journals out there. I know the Society of Radiographers has one that will take student work, and then that also is something that you can say you've done. And then we came up with a model like this, and I really like the idea of the new, do, improve. So the first year is all about learning what HEE does and what's going on with other AHPs. You know, what do podiatrists do as their job? What do physios do? Where does a physio end and an occupational therapist begin? That kind of idea. Because as a diagnostic radiographer, I'm not massively, until, you know, speaking to people and being part of different councils, I was not massively up on what the other professions that I'm going to be potentially working with. And we know interprofessional working is going to be much more important going forward, and it's really trying to get that bedded in. That's where the student voice sessions are there, but with a focus. It's not just a well, what's going wrong on your course or what's happening on your course. It's a what can you identify from that as something you could work on. And then learning about what HEE was doing in the area allows then for your second year the students to buddy up with someone in HEE in order to work on a project. And that's that idea Dave was saying about a real world project, something that is going to have an impact, but also give you a sense of accomplishment. That's the word I'm after. And then from that, we really wanted to build on this idea of coaching, mentoring, preparing yourself that when you go into the world of work, you can coach and mentor the students that come on placement, and that kind of self-development idea. So that was the project, and we did do a 5-year plan just because we were super keen beans. But the main thing that I want to talk about is what I learned. And it reflects everything that Debs said earlier on, that leadership is not management. I worked in teaching for 10 years, and you very much felt that those two phrases were really interchangeable. The management was your leaders, but actually that's completely false. Leadership is open for anyone. It's about who you are, what skills you bring to the table, and that's students from being a first year onwards. And developing that is going to be really important. And within that communication, that ability to be a leader, to give someone an idea of what you think we should be doing and get them to do that, that has massive impacts on your clinical practice. How many times do you have to deal with a patient who's slightly scared or in pain, and you have to coach them through it? You know, you're displaying those kind of leadership skills. So there's a direct way in which doing a placement like this can boost that clinical practice, even if you don't see yourself as being, you know, a manager, because you're still being a leader. I did a lot of talking with Jill Harrison and Kaz Hines over imposter syndrome, because I felt that I had a lot of that when I was a teacher, but it's kind of vanished since I've been doing this. But it kind of still creeps in every now and then, but in a different guise. And so one of the things I learned from being on this placement is because I did something different to everyone else, that imposter syndrome was there, but we spoke about it. And because sometimes we think about these anxieties as being totally negative, you can shut down, but actually that imposter syndrome is kind of a protective, so Jill was telling me about, it's there to protect you. It's kind of to make you step back from something that's uncomfortable and could cause you harm. But actually, if you manage that and find ways of managing that, it can actually be a bit of a strength in that you can prove to yourself constantly how much further you can go. So I really like that, and that's something that I really took away from this. One thing I really enjoyed was learning about what's going on nationally, and also how people at the upper ends of the career working on these big projects and liaising with different AHPs or different regions, it's all still focused on the patient. And so understanding what's happening nationally or what's happening regionally can make decisions that you're having to deal with on the shop floor make more sense. It's that kind of idea of, you know, the more you know, the better you understand. And so that was something that really kind of opened my eyes, not just to decisions being made, but also the opportunities that are there. I was saying before the session began that up to Christmas time, before I went on this placement, my whole idea of a career was I'll work in clinical and then maybe do some research or maybe do some advanced practice. But this has opened my eyes to actually, I could move into one of these areas of developing policy or improving practice, or working with an agency like HEE or SOR as a more national kind of field. And that has really empowered me to feel that I can have a lot more control over my career, which already has a lot of varied scope compared to what I felt like I was used to in teaching. And so I rattled through that, and I didn't mean to rattle, but a lot of what I was going to talk about has been mentioned much better by the people that spoke before me, because that's the idea of these placements. You know, the plans that are being put in place and the research that's going into it is feeding directly into the experiences that I know that myself and Shaheen and Zema had, which was very positive. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can actually see other people, because it's really eerie just talking to a PowerPoint. But yeah, I generally really would advise it. Someone asked in the chat beforehand what was the most difficult thing, and it was fitting it in. Because this sat as a 2-week placement instead of a normal 5-week, and it was additional to my course, trying to find a time to fit it in and not miss out on clinical practice and hours and numbers and all that. That was the hardest thing to fit in, but I would heartily recommend, if anyone gets an opportunity, that they do it. Thank you for listening. I'm going to stop now.
Thank you, Chris. That was fantastic. Some brilliant reflections, and I think what you achieved there, and this just shows what these placements can do for students in terms of, you know, those creating those, you know, the benefits for you, and how your eyes have been opened, and your views of what your career might hold for you is fantastic in such a short period of time of 2 weeks. So thank you so much for that. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jill, who's going to talk to us, and I'll chip in along the way around HEI leadership perspectives.
Hi, can you see that slide, Helen?
We can, yeah.
Yes, super. So I'm mindful of the time, and there's been so many good conversations in the chat. Helen and I will keep this brief, but obviously if anybody's got any questions or wants to have any discussions afterwards, then please do get in touch. So from an HEI perspective, we've talked the talk, so we absolutely have to walk the walk. So we, both Helen's and my organisation, Teesside and Sheffield Hallam, have offered leadership placements, have many other HEIs across the country for all AHP students. And I think some of the perhaps apprehensions around them is that, well, I'm not in a leadership post, we haven't got a leadership project going on, how can we offer a leadership placement? And I think it's absolutely everybody's business. As we've heard already, there's leadership at every level, and so there's opportunities wherever you work to offer these placements. Certainly from my own experience at Teesside in having students with me on leadership placements, they have been involved across the university, across with other organisations. I have to say, if somebody had asked me 2 years ago if I'd have a physio placement that involved the Dean of the School of Health and Life Sciences, I would have said, don't be so foolish, of course we won't. But that was how it happened, and he was great to have involved, as were some of the associate deans and staff members at every other level. So it's a great opportunity for everybody to learn and share and know more. There are opportunities for everyone, for students at every level. So we've had students who have been everything from first year pre-registration to final year master's students, and as people have alluded to already, I think that historic vision of, well, we have second years out with second years, we have third years out with third years, has completely been transformed, and we now know that learning from and with each other across organisations, across levels, is really beneficial for the students and for the organisation. And as Chris alluded to just in his presentation there, a huge number of unintended positive consequences. So we've had students who've been on a leadership placement, then decided that that's actually what they want to do their dissertation around. Definitely people thinking more about career opportunities that they wouldn't have done so previously. They'd have been very clinically focused. This is what I want to do. I want to become a clinical specialist, when actually now they're looking at a real wide variety of options. And as David spoke about, lots of really positive consequences for you as an organisation from the high quality work that the students are involved with and produce, we've certainly seen huge benefits and have I don't say used as in used and abused, but the students' work has actually informed the direction of projects that we're undertaking at the university. So thinking about, and this is something that Helen and I have put together from a lot of feedback that we've got across both our organisations, from educators, from students, from service users, thinking about how all those people can be involved and are involved, and some of the key things to think about, which again have been mentioned already. Preparation, absolutely key. What are the expectations? What's going to happen, what's going to be the outcome. Really important, I think, as again has been mentioned too, sometimes we think, oh, students spend a lot of time in front of a computer, it will be fine and learning will just evolve from that. We've found students find great benefit from doing some work around work-life balance. We all know it's very easy to sit at your computer all day and all night because you can. So preparing the students to get the most out of the placement, really, really important, as is with the educators and any service users who are involved. So sometimes the educator might be the academic, or it might be in partnership with clinicians as well. But again, so everybody's very clear about what the expectations and what the roles are. Again, taking that very different approach, historically we've been embedded in that one-to-one, one educator, one student, very much a supervision relationship, very much moving away from that. I would certainly never take one student on their own again. I would want a group of students. Their peer learning is fantastic. They all benefit from that. As an educator, as the supervisor, as the coach, it makes my life a lot easier, if I'm brutally honest. So definitely thinking about different models, not the established norm. Absolutely key, and Deb spoke, so many nuggets there about how we maintain quality and how we measure quality, to make sure that everybody is meeting those outcomes, and we've got a slide in a moment thinking about how we can do that. We've definitely found that the CPAF document has really helped with that, because it is very outcome focused rather than clinical focused. I think we probably don't actually know what excellent looks like just yet, but I think we're getting there as to what it looks like, and we've certainly done lots of work around holding focus groups and getting additional feedback from the students to ensure that quality is there. And I suppose what we need to do, and what again has been alluded to in a lot of the previous presentations and the chat, is how we change that culture, how this becomes, it's not, you've not got a placement, so here we're sending you on a research placement or a leadership placement. It's, this is a leadership placement, and this is where it sits in your development and your learning for you to become a safe, effective, highly skilled clinician at the end of your degree programme. So how do we embed these placements to become the norm? And I think we do that by making them relevant to everybody. They're relevant to the students from every level, because they can see where they sit within their learning and development, and then in their role as a professional. And they're relevant to the service users, because they're going to be better clinicians to advocate on their behalf, because they're more skilled as a leader, and they're relevant to us as educators, because we know that we are producing a workforce that is relevant and contemporary. So just finally, and sometimes this has been sort of highlighted as a barrier to some of these placements, that how can you meet your outcomes if you haven't got any clinician involvement, if you haven't got a patient in front of you, and just some ideas there on the screen about the range of opportunities. And certainly from feedback from the students, they can very much see how the skills are transferable into that clinical setting from a non-clinical setting, to enable them when they then go out onto clinical placements following a leadership placement, and they can very much identify what they've learned and the relevance of it. So I think that's all I want to say. Deb, did you want to add anything there?
No, it's just brilliant. And we talk often about some of these amazing outcomes that, you know, it is a journey. It's a journey that students go on, but the outcomes are really important. So I think the only thing I want to add is there's very much this change process. It's really important about where we ask the questions about, do you see you're a leader? And if we've just got some evidence that's coming through that when we ask that question, doesn't matter what year of students we ask the question, it's about 50% of people in the room don't see themselves as a leader. So it's really important we actually talk about your role leaders. It's part of your behaviours. So it's just getting the mindset of what this means to you, so that when you move on, whatever environment, it is an acceptable sort of conversation. But the change process does take some support. We can't just expect to put people in places without really nurturing what that looks like, because it's very different space for them.
Thanks, Debs. Thanks, Jill. That was brilliant and very eloquently put all of those things. I think I would just like to add to what you said there about, you know, we've talked about normalising this, and it's a real challenge. At Sheffield Hallam, we have a very big allied health department, big numbers, and we're really working really hard to give all our students these experiences. But, you know, we have got just in physio 150 cohort, we've got 8 professions, 100 in the BSc cohorts along the way. So, you know, we're talking big numbers, and we, you know, somehow we've got to rise to that challenge, and that means we've all got to be educators, and we need to be in-house practice educators, and we all need to be offering these placements. If students are talking about it and it's just part of that normal placement pathway, there will be no issue for the students. At the moment, I think we've got some of my students in the room, and I think most of them were given the placements as quite last minute. And I don't know whether any of them want to give their experiences of how they're feeling. I know we've got Craig, who's only here this week, in his first week. And Grace has had a leadership placement with me. She's here as well. Do you want to just give your feelings about how it feels to have a leadership placement? And I know you all felt a little bit sceptical about it at the beginning, didn't you? Any of you want to add anything? Craig, are you there still?
Yeah. I don't mind saying a few things. So yeah, I think like a lot of people, I was given leadership placement as it's a last resort because you've not got a placement. And I think there's a responsibility, as Helen said, on university teams, on placement teams, to actually sell it to students for what it is, rather than, oh, sorry, but something's gone wrong and you're going to have to be stuck with this from now on. Which, you know, is a week and a half before due to start placement, and you get told you're not going on a placement, but you're doing a leadership placement. You go, okay, well, what's it about? But yeah, from my point of view, I think coming into Hallam Monday morning, I had eyes very much wide open. I didn't quite know what to expect, if I'm honest. But by the end of the day on Monday, I think it's fair to say everyone that I've spoken to since, I've waxed lyrical about how good this opportunity is for us. You know, I'm working with Helen and Karen so far this week, and then Helen, the other student. There's so much passion and there's so much will to make this leadership placement work. That it's infectious, and everybody I talk to, I'm like, oh, I'm doing this amazing placement. It's about leadership, but I'm going to develop in this study and an opportunity in simulation placements for students to actually get a bit of knowledge and background and clinical reasoning before they go out on placement. Or if something goes wrong, well, actually, here's a brilliant alternative that's not a lesser option. It's possibly a better option in many cases. So yeah, I think it's how we sell it as students, how we sell it as universities, organizations, that leadership placements are actually really, really beneficial. And, you know, people might want to take a leadership direction in the future. They might not, but it's still giving them that underpinning knowledge and overarching experience of, this is what I can bring to the table. This is what I've got. I think Deb's, made a good point of kind of learners as leaders and leaders as learners. We're one team ultimately. I used to work for the RSPB, and we had a one team for nature approach. It's about everybody's giving back and everybody's getting involved. So yeah, I think as a placement opportunity, more needs to be done in terms of saying, yeah, look how good it is. And as I said, I think us as students and lecturers and universities, we're primed to actually, really big it up to our peers and get them involved and get them enthusiastic about it. So yeah, I've just been trying to play a video in the background on my wall, but it's not working, around our simulation, basically because since I started, we're doing simulated placements, and looking at how we develop it and improve them. And the first video that I watched on it was very much from 9 years ago, an American YouTube video that looks a bit like a dodgy soap opera. And since that point on, that's just stuck in my head, is that if this is how people perceive what a simulated placement is, we're not going to get the buy-in. So, being given the opportunity to develop that and get involved and make it realistic and make it worthwhile and get student buy-in, I think it's a brilliant opportunity. And I don't know if you can tell from my voice, but I'm really excited.
Great, thanks, Craig. I really didn't pay him to say those things, and I didn't prime him to say any of those things either. So that's great that he's feeling like this already, and it's only day 4 of his placement. So that's absolutely fantastic. But I think it just goes to show that we have to normalise these, and we have to make it part of the normal placement pathway. And certainly at Sheffield Hallam, we are desperately trying to do that, and really enhancing change and working with the challenges that we've got with our numbers to enable that to happen. So fingers crossed we'll be able to do it moving forwards, but we're working really at pace to enable that, so that's great. So I'm really aware of the time. I know that we had hoped to put quite a lot of some discussion in there, but the presentations have been so good, and lots of things and discussions going on in the chat. So as anybody, we've just got a few minutes. If anybody's got any questions that they want to ask any of the panel members at all, please feel free to do so. Or Jill, if there's anything that we need to respond to in the chat that you've seen.
I think there's been lots of discussion as we've gone along, and I think people have put their details in there, which is great. I think what Helen and I will do next is perhaps have another poll to see what people want. Certainly, it's been great to see so many people here. So we have a Twitter feed, which I imagine you all are already following, and that's how you heard about us. I'm sure Helen can put that in the chat if not, but thank you very much to everyone. If there's any feedback that you'd like to give us, then please do so via the chat function, because we will definitely be wanting to keep this momentum going, and deliver some more opportunities for us to share, and hopefully some of the people who are here today will be presenting in the very near future.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. It's been absolutely amazing, brilliant presentations. I'd really like to thank our presenters, because it's just been fantastic, and all the people for coming, and hopefully lots more leadership placements will come, and do get in contact with us if you would like any help or advice, then we will all help as much as we can with future leadership placements. So thank you so much. Great job, everybody, and lovely to see everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everyone.